And I'm going to pass it over to our speaker for today, Tricia Wallace. Tricia's background includes 31 years of nursing experience in the field of mental health with adults of all ages in hospital and community settings. Tricia has also worked as
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And thank you for joining us. This is the first of a few really excellent options for Time Out for Care Partners, and we're really hoping you can join us for the other ones as well. So we're going to start with mindfulness. The first session is this mindfulness for care partners. And I'm curious, some of you may be quite familiar with mindfulness. Others, this might be sort of a new concept that you might be curious about. So knowing that, I would like you to be flexible in your approach to how you take in this information. It might be similar to what you know, it might be different, it might be brand new. But there still is a benefit to revisiting some of this information, and perhaps you learn something different, and it might pose some more questions for you that then might deepen your practice, for example, in mindfulness. And we have two goals for this talk, or actually 5 in total. The main ones we want to look at are mindfulness as a concept, and anything that's specific to being a care partner, and how that kind of can be shaped, how mindfulness practice might be shaped a little bit in the context of being a care partner. And to get sort of used to being engaged and trying out some mindful practice. Also looking at the barriers to mindfulness and how we might be able to address some of them. And that might come also with some exchange and conversation that we have in the discussion part. And then try and make a personal plan. Try and map out when you would like to do mindfulness and what that might look like. I would recommend that's something that you explore after we're finished the talk. So we're going to start with situating this talk on mindfulness for care partners. And of course, us being online so much, I thought about the whole concept. And I don't know how many times you've heard this in the last few months. I've heard it a lot. Turn the machine off, unplug the machine for 10 minutes or 10 seconds, and then plug it back in. That allows it to reset. And I thought, well, that's kind of, we need to do that as humans. There's so much coming at us all the time, especially as care partners. It's just can be overwhelming. All the information, all the expectations, the needs that you're feeling from everyone else can feel like be overwhelming. So mindfulness could be like unplugging, even if for a short time, just enough to reset and to restart on a path that perhaps is more comforting, more clear, that just allows you that little bit of time for your body and your mind to be more clear. And I also thought about the discussion about self-care. Lots of discussion about self-care. How to be look after yourself, and what does that really mean, especially in the context of being a care partner. So I thought I would kind of just dig down a little bit more as well into concepts of the self, because that might help to focus what kind of self-care you'd like to explore. And this self-care can be enhanced by mindfulness, because mindfulness allows us space to even think about what our needs are and what we want. So we look at Carl Rogers' work on the self, and we can explore self-image, so the view that we have of ourselves, how that's shaped by our internal expectations and knowledge, how that's shaped by how we read what other people are saying or doing around us, and we read into that. We can look at self-worth, how much value do we feel that we have, and also the ideal self, so who we wish we really were. There's also notions of the existential self. So Levine talks about the existential self as being drawing lines between where I am, where I start, and where I end. So the distinction between myself and the other person. And of course, in a care partner situation, those lines can be very difficult to map out and to articulate. And the categorical self are the roles that are ascribed to us by other people in society, in our families, and also our conceptions of what our roles are. So there's whole many areas of self-concept that we can explore in order to figure out, where are my needs? Where do you think I should focus my understanding of self and what I want and how I want to develop my self-care? So let's look at mindfulness. So the definition of mindfulness, there's many out there. John Kabat-Zinn is sort of the guru of mindfulness within the medical and health community in North American contexts. And his working definition is mindfulness is the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. So lots of focus on this moment and paying attention. Most of the studies on mindfulness-based work are using some form of structured mindfulness practice that has emerged out of this sort of definition of mindfulness. There's lots of other explorations of mindfulness out there, and one that really caught my eye was one by Dan Harris, and he wrote a book, and many since then, 10% Happier. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. So for me, that's a real simple definition to hold on to. And Dan Harris has an interesting story. If you don't know it, he was an ABC news anchor, and he had a panic attack on air. And this prompted his discovery and exploration of mindfulness. So he likes to keep it simple. He uses a great analogy in terms of where mindfulness is at. If 40 years ago, he said, if someone saw another person running down the road, they'd be looking for who was chasing them, because people just didn't run. It wasn't part of our notions of healthcare and practices. It was just something people did if they had to get away or if they were on a track team. And now, of course, there's joggers all over, and we don't think twice about a jogger running past us. So Dan thought that people will someday engage in mindfulness practice similar to jogging. It'll just be part of all the different options we have available to keep ourselves healthy and to find balance in our lives. So if we look at mindfulness in terms of developing attention, we are going to be talking about how to sit with the moment and learn how to be receptive, learn how to observe, and take some time between what we're observing and what we do about it. That can be pretty challenging for care partners, but for everybody, really. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can work on that. So mindfulness is it's not about escaping, and it's not about fixing. Those are really important things. It's an invitation to kind of sense what's going on in ourselves and being aware of what's going on in our own bodies and in our minds and what's going on outside of us as well. But again, with a lens of an observer. And it's also important to know that mindfulness doesn't mean we become passive. So we're not just blobs and just sitting there not doing anything about an issue that might arise, for example. The mindfulness studies, and there used to be just a handful of them, now there's like thousands of them. Really good, controlled studies are coming out around mindfulness, and mindfulness can help rumination, which is that sort of chewing on ideas and worries over and over again. It helps with stress reduction. It's known to lower pain and discomfort. It helps with working memory and focus. When we have less emotional reactivity, that makes it easier for us to pay attention to what's going on. It makes it easier for us to be around, and it actually is associated with improved relationships. And it can make us more flexible in our thinking as well. So we'll think of more options and alternatives rather than locking into only one answer. And it also improves sleep, which is a very key element of health. Lots of really positive benefits to mindfulness. So in general, mindfulness is turning down the tendencies we have to go into the past and mine the past for things we did wrong, things that happened to us, things that evoked negative emotions. And helps us to, we do that naturally because our brains are trying to figure things out. Now, there's a difference between reflecting and saying, I wonder if I could have done that a little differently. That's different than either going to the back and remembering things that have happened to us, or having those memories become intrusively into where we're at right now. That can happen with a cue, for example. Let's say there was an altercation, an embarrassing moment walking past a store. Every time we walk past that store, we might get this wave of negative feeling, and the thoughts start to get connected with the past. So mindfulness would the practice would say, and the approach would be, okay, that's happened. We don't need to relive those moments emotionally. That's not going to help us. We're going to focus on what's happening with us right now. Alternatively, we can leap into the future. We can get into planning mode, which again is necessary and important. But planning can turn into worry, especially when we're thinking about uncertainties. We're trying to mitigate risk. We're trying to figure out how to fix something that hasn't happened yet and that might not have very many parameters at all. That type of thinking into the future draws our energy outward, takes time, and usually it can't be fruitful because we can't really make solid plans around things that we don't know about, that are quite uncertain. So mindfulness is a way to bring us back into the moment and to take time to notice what's happening in ourselves, what's happening around us, so that we can really drink in where we're at. And actually, it's the moment, it's the present. That's the only place we do have the ability to make changes, is in the moment. So let's look a little bit about the neurobiology of mindfulness. We're trying to turn down the alarm systems in the body, basically. We have an activation system, a natural activation system called the sympathetic nervous system. And that involves an interplay of cognitive, conscious thoughts and automatic physical processes that occur in the body. We need to be activated a little bit in order to have attention and energy and focus. But typically what happens with stress is that the sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive. It's on alarm all the time. It changes the way that we rest and sleep. We become more vigilant. We tend to notice things that are going wrong. We notice the threats more. And that it was a natural protective process in our bodies and minds. In modern day, though, what happens is we don't find the time for this element of resting and digesting, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system, and usually the two of them work in balance. We're geared up, we get things done, and then there's time for us to kind of rest and digest. With chronic stress and the care partner role, typically there's a lot of the sympathetic surges going on and very little time for resting and digesting. So what can happen is we can go into system overwhelm and breakers can go off almost. We can have it's sort of like a mixture between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, but sort of shuts us down. We sort of freeze and tune out. Or we become overactivated and really, really jangly and really unable to find a place of calm. So mindfulness can work with both overactivation and with that shutting off and tuning out sort of process that can occur with emotional overwhelm. So if we look at description, some of you might have seen this already, but the anger anxiety mountain. I like this description because we've got that activation in the nervous system that's kind of natural here, and then it starts to move up to the venting feelings when we're feeling activated and we want to talk about things and get these experiences out. That's kind of normal. But as we start to get higher up that mountain, what happens is our higher functioning and our thinking shuts down. And we get into, some people call it reptile brain. We just have a lot of automatic focus on, it's usually on emotional content rather than what is said, physical changes that are cues. These very sort of primitive, reactive responses get turned online when the sympathetic nervous system is really charged up. We typically can't hear well. We can't think through things very well. Even the brain starts to get less blood, and the blood goes into the bigger, larger muscles, and the blood goes away from the gut. And so we can feel our stomachs get upset as well because the body's getting ready for fight or flight. And then there's this regrouping after an event. And typically that would allow for us to have some rest and digest time and get a chance to kind of reset. But this is where the mind has the possibility to be flexible. However, what can happen is then we can start to feel guilty and review what we did and think, oh, why did I do that? How did that happen? And so the cycle that's supposed to help us to be restful ends up kind of turning us back into a cycle of escalating anxiety again. And so this is what I call the care partner mountain ranges. Well, instead of getting back down to a restful place, something happens. And then you're having to cope with that. And then maybe it worked out well. Maybe there were some words exchanged. Maybe there was some frustration that just kind of comes out. And then you're, oh, why did I do that? Why did I yell? That kind of thing can happen. And then something else happens, because typically for people, for care partners, there's kind of always something happening. So to be able to find a break and to be able to find some respite from this tension and this anxiety is what mindfulness can really help with, even when there's a lot going on. So it's focus work that we're looking at. We are exploring our needs and feelings right away, even when we're not feeling too activated. And this is where we can kind of sit and go, oh, what's going on in my body? What am I sensing? What am I feeling? These sorts of things that we typically don't even give ourselves time to think about. We're making time for that with some mindfulness processes. And then if we do go up to top of the mountain, there's still that sense of, okay, it's humanly impossible to stop myself from doing what I did at that time. And so I have to forgive myself. And that's what that regrouping process is as well. No room for judgment. Get a chance to just say, okay, that didn't work out as well as it should have. I yelled. I got to go back and talk about that with my care partner, or the healthcare team, or whoever that the episode might have occurred with, and just get a chance to explore what could I have done differently, and then make an ask of others as well. What do you think I could have done differently to make that been a more smooth process? So mindfulness can really help with that whole system that gets you back to a more restful place. Oops. So mindfulness, there's many ways to practice mindfulness. And if we look at this picture here, it'd be interesting to see what sort of practices you engage in. They're not all about meditating, are they? They're about attitudes to ourselves. They're about approaches, that open-mindedness and being ready. They're about taking time to spend in nature. They're sensory, so walking barefoot, for example. They're about the physical body and making sure that your physical body gets some expression of emotions and tension. About breathing, right? To be able to breathe and take that time. So there's lots of different ways to kind of build elements of mindfulness into the everyday. So let's try a short mindfulness exercise. We can use an anchor to the moment. We can use our breath, or if breathing is challenging for you and you don't really like to do breath work, you might find a picture like this one, something to focus on. If you use a picture, you want to kind of take the picture in and then not focus on it sharply. Sort of let the picture sort of soften and the gaze become on the whole picture itself rather than sharp focus on elements of the picture. For those who choose to use the breath, that's of course what the statements are going to be mostly about breathing. So I suggest that you sit or stand if you're not comfortable sitting, and have the intention of being alert. So you want an upright posture, and you still want to remain feeling comfortable. And if your legs are crossed, like mine are right now, I'm going to uncross my legs. First thing we're going to do is notice the senses. So pay attention. Pay attention to the ground. And notice its stillness. And notice the way it supports us. If you feel comfortable and able, close your eyes. If you keep your eyes open, try and focus on the picture or one item. Notice the pressure and sensation on your feet, the front, the balls of the feet, the sides, the heels. Recognize the connection that your body has with the chair, the back of the legs, the hips, your back, lower back. Recognize the position of your arms. Imagine that they are falling from your shoulders. Some people say like drapes. And where are your arms resting? Are they on your lap? On the chair arms? You sense into where the arms are making a connection. We can pay attention to our breath now. Don't try and change it. Just notice your breath's natural rhythms. Its natural depth. You might feel a cool sensation with the air as it enters your nose. Warmer as you exhale. Notice where the air is flowing. If you get caught up in any tension with breathing, that's fine. Just go back to noticing things in your body and then return to your breath. Let's shift our focus to the exhale this time. Take a few breaths with a focus on the exhale. What's different when you change your focus like that? Let's deepen our breath, allowing it to fill our lungs and expand our body. We might notice it underneath our collarbones, drawing the chest upward, allowing the shoulders to relax. You might notice the breath going more deeply into the lungs. And if we relax our tummies, that makes space for the lungs to expand. You might notice our lungs expanding to the back, imagining breathing into the spine. With each inhale, drawing the spine upward, straightening its path. We can also sense the chest expanding underneath our arms. So that the rib cage is opening up on the sides. Let's take a few breaths here and recognize how the rate and rhythm of our breath might have changed when we remember to open up the space for our lungs to expand. A focus on the breath then becomes an anchor. You might notice the thoughts float into our minds. And that's okay. That's natural. If they do, we can recognize the thought, feeling, and then go back to the breath. Let's take a couple more breaths here and then we'll finish up and move on. Here we go. So when we talk about what we're doing with these sessions and this breathing that we might engage in, we are looking at what's going on noticing our senses in our bodies. So we can start to sense with the breath. And then we can start to explore other things that are happening. Where are the areas of tension? Where do we find relaxation? Where are there maybe some blocks in energy that we're feeling that we might be able to open up? So this is where different strategies in mindfulness can really blossom. You can find something that really works for you. But it is a lot to do with this sensing in and figuring out what you're feeling and not holding on to it, just sort of recognizing it's there and then focusing again on the breath. So this opens up that space, doesn't it? Viktor Frankl talks about that, right? Between stimulus and response, there is a space. So if we consider that it takes about 0.25 of a second by the time a sensory experience becomes a thought, like a fully formed thought. And then how quickly we might react to that thought. If we take one breath between that sensation and thought and our response and our reaction, there's going to be a lot more time for our higher cognitive function to kick in. It's going to give us time to be more open-minded and less reactive. The brain works very, very quickly. So even one breath allows for that space to occur and let the mind think about alternatives that might be more fruitful, for example. So let's look at some barriers to mindfulness. This picture, I think her facial expression says it all, doesn't it? So I'd like you to think about what the barriers are for you for mindfulness, like what tends to get in the way. You know, it's usually the busyness and sometimes just the exhaustion. People tell me I try mindfulness and I'm like literally I'm asleep when I do anything. I'm lying down. I want to do this. Um, Now, sleeping is important and you need to veg out. However, if we try mindfulness and we keep on sleeping, um, that could be almost like a shutting off, right? That's kind of like, could be like the breaker going off. And there, you might not be building any skills for mindfulness if you keep on falling asleep. However, a mindfulness practice that helps you get to sleep and you know, that's the intention of it, okay, that might be just what you need for your sleep. So that's something to explore as you're moving along. Um, and also most people, and I'm the same way, when I need to do mindful meditation the most, that's the time I don't do it because I think I don't have time. I don't have time. And that's the time when we actually do need to do it and recognize that it could be just a few minutes at a time. That could make a big difference, or even a few seconds multiplied a number of times during the day. Cues to you needing to practice mindfulness are these emotional experiences, sadness, guilt, hopelessness that are sort of really intractable, that are really kind of with you quite a lot. And you can also look at other elements of that as well, your overall balance and health, and make sure that you've ruled out experiences of depression or challenges like that. That can also bring on a lot of guilt and hopelessness. And there, you can talk with us about Parkinson's Society or reach out to other supporters in your lives to make sure that your mental health is in a balance and that you're able to engage in mindfulness. It's really going to be helpful for you. There's also sarcastic and, reactionary type of behaviors if we're noticing that they're happening more and more. I see this picture of the lady with her tongue sticking out as sort of like contempt, like you're like, oh, and to the person in the room, you might be like, oh, yeah, relatively pleasant. And then they leave the room and you're like, oh, eye rolling, that sort of stuff. That could be a cue. Mindfulness is going to be likely very beneficial for you. And of course, the rest and sleep stuff, which you've already talked about, the pure exhaustion and the challenges that you might have falling asleep or waking up with anxiety and worries with your sleep. So structured practice for mindfulness can be quite different for different people. So keep an eye that you can do guided recordings, which are quite popular, and really there's many of them out there that might be support you. There's also visualization. Some people use mandalas, which is that drawing on the right hand side, to be able to focus their minds, and there are structured ways that you can work on visualization. Walking mindfulness is also really something that's quite doable. We can do it inside, we can do it outside, but it's really about just slowing everything down, noticing the way we walk. Even for, let's say, a hallway that we're going up and down, instead of racing up and down that hallway, thinking about what we have to do at the end of it, slow it down and take slower steps, heel to toe, noticing the pressure of your feet as they connect with the ground and making a focus of it. It's some people talk about that sort of mindfulness where you have something in your center and you have to keep it steady. It's almost like if you have a really full cup and you've got to be very careful about the way that you're walking with that cup, but you're paying attention to the moment when you're doing that. And that's kind of what mindful walking can look like as well. Mantras, so physical, sort of auditory statements to ourselves can be very helpful as well. They can be general statements like peace. They can be more positive statements like I can be calm. I'm not alone. I do have support. There's different mantras that you can think of, and they can change over time as well. That might be very helpful for you. The idea of joining others in meditation is more difficult now, isn't it? But that can be done either on your own and through, some people will be online, or they'll be have a Zoom call or a conversation where they're walking with somebody else. So they're not alone necessarily with their mindfulness practice as well. You can take a walk in the woods, say hello to the trees, and be with somebody on the other end of the line, for example, if you choose to do that. So there's other recommendations for mindfulness that you can integrate little tiny bits at a time. The doorknob exercise, if you think of a doorknob as a door, as actually a threshold from one moment to the next. So if you're standing at a door, typically it should be a door that's moving outward. You don't want to be standing in front of a door that's moving inward in case it bangs you. So just take a moment before you just open the door. Take a moment, put your hand on the doorknob, focus on that, take a breath, and then proceed. Brushing your teeth, slow it down. Notice the sensory experiences of your brushing your teeth, for example. Mindful eating. Instead of gulping something down before you have to get to the next item, what can you slow down and notice the taste, the textures, the experiences of eating? Aromas, mindful aromas, peppermint, lavender, these sorts of aromas are quite commonly used. And there's many out there that might be helpful for your sensory system that's really on overdrive, and it can help the senses to calm down. Car meditation, obviously not while driving, but I recommended this for people who need that space. If there's no other place to get time alone, getting in a car, before you start the car, take a moment, take a deep breath. Take a few breaths. You might want to say, I'm going to give myself this time. I'm going to be kind to myself. And just take a few breaths before I start the car. Waiting room mindfulness, the same sort of thing. If you're able to, and you don't have to be vigilant and wait, if you're in a waiting room, you can practice your breathing or the way you're sitting in a way that's really quite unobtrusive. People aren't going to really notice what you're doing. Where are my feet? So when things are getting really, really up in our heads, which is going to happen a lot when we're stressed out, we're going to try and come out of that mind. Being stuck in our mind is usually happening a lot with worry, and just say, oh, where are my feet? Can I even feel my feet? Yes, I can feel my feet in the ground underneath my feet. That's part of what we call grounding. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a quick way to ground. I know I've shared this with a lot of people over time, but I find it's really great observational exercise as well. And just to review it quickly, we could have look around the room and notice 5 things that are rectangular in shape. And you would look for those things, but you wouldn't say what they are. You just say yes when you're done. Identify 4 things that are brown. Yes. Sense into 3 sensations. Hot, cold, pressure. Heather's talking about simple meditation practices. That's interesting. And then 2 sounds that you notice. And 1 emotion. So that would be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That typically can be very grounding quite quickly for people. So mindfulness is really helping us reflect. It's helping us reset and reconsider things. This is sort of the main goals: improving the quality of our lives, the relationships that we have with people. And it also helps us be more resilient. Mindfulness is really good at helping us to build resilience. So Dan Harris talked about mindfulness as a superpower. And I think that is a really good way to think about mindfulness, because it helps us to get through the storms that life brings us with more focus, more groundedness, and a sense of certainty and yet flexibility. So if we think about mindfulness as a superpower, then that's a sort of reflection we can have for how are we going to use this in our lives. We might use it for having a little bit more time and energy to exercise, for example. And super walks coming up, you've got your super power of mindfulness. You might consider starting up a plan that includes mindfulness and a little bit more activity as well. You'll start to make some space for opportunities that you didn't think about before. That helps because you're really paying attention to your needs and your sense of self-care when you're engaged in mindfulness. So thanks so much for joining us today. I wanted to let you know we have support for you. Parkinson's Society BC can help you with resources for mindfulness. We have free counseling or some consults if you want to check in around that. And we also have we will be running another online mindfulness class. And of course, there are many others out there that you might take advantage of, and we might be able to help you look for those and get some resources for yourselves around that. Thanks so much. And I'm interested if there's any questions that are coming up for people. And also, what did you find? Did you find that breathing exercise, it was relatively short? Did you find that it made a difference for you at all? Did you feel one way before the breathing exercise and a different way afterward? I see a few people typing there. This is a good time to do our breathing exercises while we're waiting for the typing. Okay, so you felt relaxed after the session. That wasn't very long at all, was it? We don't always pay attention to our breath, do we? It's kind of, breathing is really interesting because it's partially conscious and partially automatic. And so we can move along our day and not notice our breath. And yet there's a lot going on with our breath that might cue us into things that we can work on. And also we can help ourselves if we find ourselves holding on to our breath, holding our breath. That happens a lot. A breath rate increasing, for example. The more that we pay attention and try and release some tension in our breathing, trying to open up some space for our breathing, that sends messages to the body. It sends automatic messages to the body saying, oh, it's okay. We don't need to be so vigilant. The mind and the body work together. If our heart rate goes up, then a whole bunch of cascade of neurochemicals and hormones start to get going. And breathing rate and our heart rate are connected. The more we breathe, usually the higher our heart rate gets. That sends signals to the body that reinforce stress. So when we relax our breathing and consciously slow down our breathing, we can actually curb the intensity of a stress response. Is everyone here who is doing mindfulness? I'm curious. Who is currently practicing mindfulness? So Gwen, you're inspired to try it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, so hopefully there are some activities there you might be able to try. And if you have any questions about them, let us know. We'll be able to clarify them for you. Try, at the beach. And then we can pay attention when we're outdoors, can't we, to the warm sun compared with the cool shade or the wind that's blowing on our skin. These our body's recognition of the moment. When we're in a hurry and we're doing stuff all the time, we don't even think about that stuff. So spending just even a minute, a couple of minutes outside noticing the warm sun, for example, can make all the difference. Walking on the beach with the sand on our feet. Yeah. Makes all the difference. Well, I hope you found this helpful. And thanks for the feedback. Any more? We'd love to hear more from you. And just wishing you all the best in this, on your journey toward making more time for yourselves. And that's what this time out for Care Partners is about. It's about finding ways to help you gain balance in your lives, to help you build resilience, and to find the fuel you need to move forward in a way that feels healthier, that feels like you have something as well for yourselves. So I look forward to getting a chance to hear from you in the other sessions as well, hoping you can make time.